Sure. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to No Code North and the Lodge. And our conversation today, our panel discussion about AI, trend or transformation. And I just want to welcome you all. This will take about an hour. If you want, we will ask questions in the YouTube chat. If you're on YouTube, we'll bring them over to our gather space, or you can always join us in our gather space. So I'm going to just hand this over to Patrick Corsetti, who's one of our team members here at No Code North, and he's going to take it away and lead this discussion. Hi, Patrick.
Thanks, Penny. I feel like we're on like a newscast. Like, oh, thanks, Penny. Like the weather out here is no. Thanks everybody for joining us today, especially our two guests, Raymmar and Witt. A lot of you know both of them, but I'll just give like a super quick intro for everybody. So first off, I'm Patrick. I'm a Webflow and web developer based out of Toronto in Canada, and I'm a new member to the No Code North team. I'm excited to be leading this discussion as it's gonna lean a little bit into the techie side, but I feel like with AI, it's giving everybody in the no code space more of a foot in the door there. Our one of our guests here is Raymmar, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at DXOS, where he leads marketing, project management, and community growth. This is one of my favorite lines from his website, but he lists himself as a design school dropout who spent a decade in sales before hacking into tech. He now builds trust and drives revenue for emerging brands online. Welcome, Raymmar.
Yeah, it sounds impressive.
I'd
like to meet that guy. No.
Yeah. I was like, how did we pull him? Like, who did we bribe to get him on the show here?
Nice.
Our next guest here is Witt Langstaff. So Witt is the principal designer and AI tech lead at Edgar Allen. Over the past 5 years, he's been driving AI consulting and Webflow front-end projects, combining deep technical expertise with UX and UI product design to deliver some compelling digital experiences. And I've also found out that he is a fan of one of my favorite Canadian chocolate bars, which is Coffee Crisp. So I think he has excellent taste. Welcome, Witt.
I wish if you were to send me some, please.
Okay, we'll connect again after the live here. I don't want you to give your address publicly, unless everybody wants to send you coffee crisps. Then I mean, like that can be arranged.
I'll take them.
So the reason that we want to have this discussion today is, I mean, we've all kind of seen AI evolve a lot over the last, I guess, like 2 years since it's gone really public. And it started as like a little bit of, like a novelty, and then it turned into a little bit of a trend. And now we're seeing it, really work its way into a lot of workflows and giving a lot of people power that they didn't have before. And I mean, I think I would love to start out to just see like, how has your opinion evolved, since it became public, since you started using it, and we kind of got past a little bit of the novelty stage here. And then, so like Raymmar, I want to start off with you here just to get your idea, because I know like you work it heavily into like your current workflow as well.
Yeah, I think there was a moment probably 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, something like that, where I was playing with some of these AI tools and just getting really surprised with like what it would come back with and like what it would actually execute on. I've been playing with this stuff for a couple years now, and it almost always leaves you hanging. It doesn't complete the task. It gets hung up on something, and especially when you're like using the agent and you're just kind of like vibe coding or whatever they call it. Because I'm fairly technical, but I'm not super technical, right? Like just enough dangerous to like get in the code and kind of see what's happening, but I can't write it semantically. But I understand the business logic and all that. And so like up until about 6-8 weeks ago, I feel like these agents were kind of like leaving me just holding the bag, like getting excited, like here's some UI, here's some things, but it wasn't actually finishing the job. And then I was able to build a couple things just recently that I was like, damn, this is really good. And like it just keeps going, right? Like it keeps resolving and doing the thing that I ask it to do. And yeah, I just, I don't know. And if this is the worst it's ever going to be, it's just kind of blowing my mind. And so I know it's not the be all end all, and I know you still have to have a lot of technical skill to get what you really want out of it. But yeah, it seems like over the last couple months, it's really made some big improvements, and I imagine it's just going to keep moving forward. I imagine there's some limitation, but yeah, I don't know.
that's such
I
an
don't know if that
interesting
answered the question,
distinction.
but yeah, just a
No,
little bit of a background intro. Yeah.
it definitely did, and that's such like an interesting distinction to make too, where it's like, you know, it will never get worse from here, where it's kind of like, it is true, right? Like we've seen like nothing but improvements over the last like year and a half, right? So yeah, I mean, I've experienced that a lot too. I find like I jump between tools a lot to try to get like, you know, the min-maxing, right? Like trying to really squeeze out what's possible, as they're all, it's cool too that they're all like competing against each other to like kind of push the envelope, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then Witt, like I know like you guys have been, you know, I know you're not like super involved with Slater right now, but like as a part of Edgar Allan too, like Slater was something that went out, and it was something that you guys started like building really early with, you know, an AI integration. It's cool too though to see like how you're using AI and you know, natural language protocol agents and stuff like that to like build on you know, existing client sites and stuff like that. I mean, has your opinion of what's possible to do with it like on a production site like really evolved as well? Like again, like from the novelty at the beginning to, you know, like, yeah, this is a staple. This is kind of like something that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Raymmar was saying, my experience has been the same. Where it's like I remember looking at GPT-3 and being like, "Well, this is cool. It's kind of a magic trick, you know." It's like, well, it's pretty good at coming up with the next thing. And I think it was GPT-4 when we started using that and working with the API that it was like, whoa, this is actually really, you know, really good. And like Raymmar was saying with the agentic stuff in the last 2 months, I mean, it's crazy. Replic's doing crazy stuff, Windsurf, Cursor. We've used it for all kinds of stuff from, you know, obviously we use it in Slater. We used it to actually, you know, build parts of Slater and to extend it. And it's really cool how fast it's evolving. I think, you know, some of the stuff we've used it for most recently were working with integrations. Like we did this thing for a client with Algolia, where they wanted to have the ability to use just natural language queries, like tell me about investments in X space between these years or something like that, but just in like plain English. And we were using GPT-4o as like an interpreter in between to take those natural language queries, turn them into an Algolia prompt, and then get those search results. So it's, you know, you start doing these little things and kind of tweaking them and turning the knobs, and it's like, just think about what else you can do. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
crazy. So yeah, it's yeah,
That's
it's been
kind of
wild.
that's kind of the fun of it to me, is like just ask, like you get these crazy thoughts. Oh, sorry. I was watching the YouTube, and there was a bit of a delay, so I thought I was like losing audio. Yeah, you get these crazy thoughts and you just ask, you're like, hey, can you do this? And then it comes back and it does it, and you're like, you know, and then you're like, okay, what else can you do? And I think a lot of people, like I saw a post the other day and it was saying like, just ask the LLM whatever you would ask whoever you're going to ask. You know, like people are like, oh, how do I use these tools? How do I do this? How do, you know, like everyone thought prompt engineering was going to be like a career path. Like, no, just talk to these things and ask it questions, and then like maybe ask it deeper questions, and then, hey, are you sure about that? Why not this thing? You know, and like it just becomes this beautiful sounding board to just go back and forth. And especially when you're doing like software stuff, you kind of have to get patient with it. And for sure, there's like this flow you get into where, you know, you're talking to it back and forth, and sometimes, you know, like I get super angry. I'm like, why would you do that, stupid son of a, you know, like, so it's kind of funny to like how you find yourself talking to this thing when you get into these sessions, and like it almost becomes a partner as you're building, right? It becomes like this sidekick. And for a long time, all I ever thought about was like, man, if I just had a developer whose shoulder I could sit over and be like, hey, do this, try this, push this over here, move this around here. But like no developer is ever going to be okay with doing that, right? Like they're going to get super pissed off at you. And then especially if 6 hours down the road, you're like, let's throw this away, you know, like, but the AI doesn't care. You can just experiment, you can tinker with stuff, you can try stuff, you can break stuff, you can revert. And it's getting better now with GitHub and syncing and, you know, like, what do you call that? Version control. So Witt, I don't know how you're like, you know, what's your primary tool? Like what's your kind of core? Are you using Cursor mostly? Are you bouncing around between them? Like what's your...
I'm all over the map, man. I'm using Cursor. I'm using VS Code still. I'm using Windsurf. I'm using Slater, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I with so many of these things, there are so many of them, and they're all evolving kind of at their own paces. So part of it's just trying to, you know, try a bunch of stuff and keep up with it as best I can. But yeah, I'm all over the map. I think one of the coolest things that I've seen with all this stuff is just the barrier to entry of building products or building extensions on some platform like Webflow, which already does so many things really well. It's just bringing it's making it so much more accessible to people who might kind of shy away from some of the technical stuff. My first interactions with it, my background before I got into design and tech was in writing. And so it was like, if you can describe the thing that you're trying to get really well, and you can really kind of get it crystallized in your mind, you can build it. Like you can, the push pull is there, but you can do it, and you don't have to have a ton of experience. So.
Yeah. And I think that's probably like the biggest key. I think like lots of people, especially if you're new and you don't understand like the process of kind of, working through a technical product or building some kind of technical product, and you're just expecting to like one shot this app or like, build me Airbnb. And it's like, okay, you might get to like the UI of Airbnb, right, but you're probably not going to one shot like the full app. And so, like most of the time when I've had success working with these tools, it's like thinking about how do you break things down, and not necessarily like from a developer standpoint, knowing how the code works, but thinking as a developer would about how you break down the project. How do you chunk these things up and say, okay, like the core functionality I want is this. How do you sandbox the AI to just give me, like, let's say I wanted to call an API. Instead of trying to build the whole app, like just get something that talks to the API and brings you the data from the API. And now once you have that connection, start adding the rest of the functionality around that. And instead of trying to one-shot this thing where it starts adding 10 other features and it loses focus on like that core thing. So a lot of times you just learning how to prompt this thing, learning how to like break it down into digestible chunks that it can actually deliver on. I think that's, going back to the prompt engineering not becoming a real job, but like learning those processes, like learning what the development process would be like or how to approach this stuff, I think is just as important as, anything else, especially as we go into, the next phase of this.
Yep. So is that like a mindset or a methodology that you had to adapt, or is that kind of like how you went into these projects in the first place? Because like I know, like you said, like a lot of people will just be like, spit out Airbnb for me, right? And if a technical person will realize that there's even limitations if you just ask, like even if you didn't ask an AI for it, if you ask the development team, like give me Airbnb, of course there's going to be discovery sessions and stuff like that, right? Which a lot of people will kind of consider like an oversight. But I mean, like, yeah. So is that like a methodology that you had to adapt? Is that something that you already came into using AI like agentically, like knowing? I mean, like, was there any big misconceptions that you had to like unlearn to work with AI effectively? This is open to either of you.
Will?
I mean, like, I think honestly with some of it, if you know where you're trying to get, like I'm starting to work with TypeScript, and I'm not a TypeScript guy. Like that's not my main thing. But like I have been able to say, okay, this is my goal, is to kind of get to here. And you can even, work through dialogue with the models to say like, hey, how might I approach this? And it can actually help you break this stuff out, like Raymmar was saying, where, it can say, think about API connections first, make sure you're getting your data, then start thinking about transforming the data and stuff like that. One of the coolest side effects of this stuff, just kind of has been tinkering and playing, is that if you really are paying attention to what it's doing, and it is actually one of the reasons I don't work a ton with agents, like I actually just kind of raw prompt and go through step by step. You can learn a ton. Like it can teach you problem solving in languages based on the syntax of different languages, which are, there's common is.
Yeah.
What was that?
Susan, we might need you to just mute your mic there. Yeah, Will, I totally agree. I think I've learned more, and this has been true all along the way. When I first learned WordPress, I learned more technical stuff than I ever imagined, right? I just wanted to write. I just wanted to start a blog. And then next thing you know, I'm learning how to build websites. And then that's in like 2012, 13, whatever. Then 16, 17, I find Webflow and I learn more. Now I got to learn HTML and CSS and the box model and blah, blah, whatever. And then you start learning a little bit of JavaScript to make these websites do what they want to do. And you learn more technical stuff. And now with this AI stuff, another 5 years later, so I'm like seeing these cycles. It's like like these jumps in my technical ability. Now I'm in GitHub. Like if you go look at my commit graph, I'm like literally the team at work, you know, like they asked me to do stuff in Git. And I'm like, no, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. You know, like I've had moments where I'm like, you want me to like do what? You want me to pull this thing and create an issue and push the thing? I'm like, what if I break shit? You know, like you can't trust me in Git with this big project, you know? But I'm learning to do this stuff and it's like totally out of my comfort zone, but I'm working with very technical folks over there. And that's where they live, right? They live in the code. They live in these different workflows. And so I didn't know a lot of this coming into it, but I think the more you do know, the better off your process will be. So the folks that think they're going to come in and just like get all the results from these tools without like doing the work that many of us are doing by learning some of these core levels, like they're just not going to be able to use the tool as effectively as you are. Just like I can't use the tool as good as a really technical dev that knows what the code should be doing, because they can spot, hey, you're making a mistake. So they don't have to write the code manually, but they can spot that it's making a mistake. Whereas, you know, like I try to keep up with what changes are happening in the code files, but a lot of times the stuff I'm building is more complicated than I can, you know, like kind of connect. And so it's like, it's hard to keep up. I'm just like letting the agent do its thing and hoping that it's, you know, fingers crossed.
I mean, they've gotten to the point where you can do that. Like that, like you said, I mean, really just in the last couple months, it's gotten to be, like I've been working with Replit off and on probably for about a year at this point since they released the agent. And it was kind of the same experience I had with GPT at first, where it was like, it's cool, but it'd kind of like leave you hanging sometimes. And it doesn't really do that as much anymore.
I know.
And it's like, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah, it's dangerously good. I've had a couple, I mean, probably my most popular X posts ever have been in the last couple months sharing some of the stuff I'm building, which blows my mind because they're just like these little videos of me tinkering in Replit. But to have the capabilities to just think, have some idea on a weekend and have a working prototype of it, and you know, and I'm not going to even say like 2 hours, right? Like some of these things, like I'll go on, like I've been pure zombie mode on the weekends. Like, you know, like I've gotten lost in the matrix. Like I talk to my friends about like just getting pure lost in the matrix. And like my weekends are gone where I'll spend like 8 hours, just 10 hours, 12 hours, just lost. And then you come out and you're like, the fucking thing works. You know, like I posted that video the day, like, holy shit, I got the X API. I've got all my bookmarks. Now I'm graphing them and I'm building these little reports. And it's like, it's kind of become like my little weekend obsession. It's totally ruined my social life, but it's also fun because like I'm learning more and bringing skills to the table that I just didn't know I'd have. So I think at a certain level, you just gotta get obsessed with an idea, and then it's kind of like playing an instrument, right? If you play guitar and you just want to like learn songs, you're probably not gonna learn guitar. But if you have like one song you really want to learn, and that's like in your head, you'll figure out how to pluck that song and like learn that specific song. And as you get obsessed with more and more songs, like you'll learn the guitar easier. And I think going back to your question, Patrick, about learning, like that's it. You just have to like pull on a thread on an idea and try to approach it from a bunch of different ways. And we can talk about like that workflow, because I think, you know, like going to one platform, creating some kind of documentation or schema, some kind of thing for an approach, have it write you the prompt, and then you take that into the agent, have it do that, you know, like, so, and there's all sorts of, you know, tooling and workflows and stuff that are evolving that I don't think you can learn. You don't, like, there's no way to know them. They're literally coming up right now, you know? Well,
yeah, I mean, like, and then even going back to what you're talking about, like a traditional workflow, like even if you're working with developers and they're using Git, like that's how they work at, you know, one company, you go to another company, they might have a completely different workflow within the same tool, or a different branching method, or a different, you know, database structure, something like that. And you always kind of have to be adaptable to it. Or you just, I was going to say, if you really want to learn Git and, you know, you're struggling with it, just add like force to everything, and then everything will just work pretty magically there. But no, I would actually really love to talk about, you know, your typical workflow. So like, Raymmar, if you want to talk about, how you go from ideation on like Friday night to like X post on Monday morning, like what does that workflow look like?
So the few times, like the few things that I've built, like for instance, the thing that I shipped most recently that I'm really excited about is like a directory for our local tech meetup. And I, you know, been tinkering that for a few months. That was the first thing I posted that kind of went nuts. And it's a wrapper around the Luma API. So we use Luma for our events calendar for this local meetup, and we wanted a membership directory. And I had a Webflow site before, and it just wasn't as dynamic as I wanted. I was thinking about adding Alceta to handle memberships and do all sorts of stuff. And so I was like, let me see if I can like use Luma as the backbone, because we already have everyone in there. whatever. And so that's why I started tinkering with like, hey, can I just talk to this API? And that was like when I saw the Luma data come in, I was like, oh, this is great. And then like Will was saying, you just start asking the agent like, hey, can you turn this into X, Y, and Z? Can we build this view now? Can I, and that was where I mostly learned the workflow. And so the workflow for me has been like Replit been my main tool. I use Cursor and Replit. And then ChatGPT, I often like let's say that the agent gets stuck, I'll grab the code from Replit, one file or two files, take that over into ChatGPT and say, hey, what's going on with these files? Do you see any mistakes? And then like take that insight back to Replit, and then I give the agent prompting that I probably couldn't give the agent because I don't know how to read the files. And so like that's one thing that I also encourage people to do. Like, I don't know if that's, again, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but like using the different modalities, right? Like learning how to take a file from one project to the next. For instance, in Replit, you can push things to GitHub, and then I can open that project in Cursor. So then I can use any other model I want to, again, try to solve a problem, and then I can copy and paste code into this other environment. And so it's like, yeah, Replit will do certain things, but other places I might want a second opinion. And I don't have, again, lots of developer friends to give me those second opinions. And so maybe I just go ask another AI. And I say that tongue in cheek because I actually do have somebody I meet with once a week who looks at the code and the stuff I'm doing. And he is a very competent technical developer. And that's been super useful too, because he walks me through how to troubleshoot inside of an IDE, how to click on a function, see what that's connected to, see what the variables are, see, how the types are outlined, and like just troubleshoot. Like, so learning, again, developer processes for troubleshooting, how to navigate the code, like the stuff already exists. You just kind of have to learn how to do these things.
So this is so funny. I was gonna ask a little bit later about like how do you pick the right tool for each step, but then you kind of like you outlined how you think about picking a tool that's just like appropriate or will like get you over that hump. But then like as you were talking, you were like, I don't have a lot of developer friends that I can just like text and ask questions. I'm like, how cool would it be if you had like all of these AI, like you had Claude saved in your phone and OpenAI and whatever, and then you could just like text one of them, be like, hey, I'm having this problem. But it doesn't respond to you like super ChatGPT response. It responds to you like it's like giving you the business for like not knowing how to do something kind of funny. Like that'd be
you need the context window for it to actually be helpful, right? Like that's why Cursor is good. That's why these IDEs are really good, is because like you could go ask ChatGPT anything, but in Cursor you can give it the context window. So it's like it's hard to have like, even when I do talk with a developer, it's like it's not like he's studying this code or spending hours in the projects. Like, so when he comes in, he's just getting this very cursory look. So even his advice is not as good as like Claude in Cursor when I give it 3 different files and have it like look exactly at all. It's there's just, I don't know Witt, how you like, if you're dealing with other developers, how you like check your workflows, like what's your processing for any of that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same stuff, and I'm big on bouncing back and forth too. I will take output from GPT and push that through Claude sometimes, and I'll take stuff from Claude and push it back through GPT. A lot of times I'll start with like on a GPT Plus subscription. If I'm trying to work through a problem, I start with 4.0 and I just kind of like describe what I'm after, and then I get kind of clarity on that, and then I'll kick it up to 0.4 mini or 0.4 mini high, or like 0.3 for like something really intense, like something really heavy, and then just kind of like scale up and down based on the complexity of what I'm trying to do. Because you got, unless you got the $200 a month subscription, which I do not, the rate limits kick in pretty quick on the higher end. But if you do that kind of like scaling up and down in terms of asking the questions, then you kick something over to Claude, bring it into the IDE, you can make it work. And it's kind of fun just to see how they all respond differently, like they each have their own kind of vibe in terms of what their tone is and how they approach stuff. But yeah, I'm very much doing the same stuff, Raymmar. It's very much like kind of try this, kick it over to this, see what happens.
I will even often just record myself talking through an idea, thinking about what I wanted to do, thinking about the scope, thinking about like what platforms I want to connect. And just like I'm talking right now, I'll hit record or hit a granola message or just anything that'll transcribe something, like even Apple Notes will like transcribe them, and I'll just go through it. And then after thinking about that, it may be 30 minutes, it may be 40 minutes, it may be 5 minutes, it may be a minute, whatever. Like, and then I take that, transcribe it, feed that into, again, like Will was saying, a 4.0 or something like that, and say, hey, I'm thinking about this type of product. Here, here's like, turn this into a requirements document.
Yep.
And it'll take the transcript and turn it into a requirements doc. And then I'm like, okay, hey, what do you think about this application? How can we make it more solid? How would you approach this if you were writing a prompt for an agent? And then it spits out like some kind of sequential process, an outline, all the scope, the dot, like a requirements document that you can then use as an outline. And then that becomes the thing you take into the agent with the core prompt. I'll literally have it give me a prompt. Sometimes I'll have it iterate a few times on that prompt. And then I go into the agent and have it run that thing. And sometimes I have to do that 5 or 6 times or ask the agent to do it 8 times before I get something that's usable to move forward on. Right. And so like that's another thing where I think folks will just try it once and like, I didn't get it, and then they give up. It's like, no, try it again. Word it a different way. Remove some of the scope. Try to like narrow the focus of the thing you want, and like go back to the well and go back and forth between those things until you get, again, a base of what you need. And once you have that core base, syncing with an external API, doing the auth, doing the whatever, then you can start saying, hey, I want this extra little feature. I want to add this little thing. And the more focused you can make each of those requests, the more likely it is to just keep building. And then again, you can start scaling out some really complex stuff without the whole thing falling apart.
It's so funny because like the more we talk about this, the more it is sounding like a big collaborative group chat with like you and like all of the agents around like that can like collaborate on it. It's kind of awesome to think about it like that.
It's the power of like, I mean, this process, just the stuff I'm tinkering with, like, would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars of development and time and 6 months, a year, like to build. Like even just last year, 2 years ago, trying to build any of these things that I'm building in like a few hours on a weekend would have taken 6 months of planning, a 3-person dev team, some kind of project manager, who knows what kind of budget. And then maybe you get a fraction of what you think you want. And and who knows if it's usable code anyway, because maybe you went to some shop because you don't have, $200 an hour to pay 3 different devs working on a project, to get like the best and the best. And so you're paying somebody else that's maybe not as competent. Maybe you're talking to a project manager who's then taken that to their remote team. And so there's like these layers of translation where things and details just get lost. And so like, having that team, like exactly like you said, having that team that I can just directly input and kind of fully manipulate, that's the future of these workflows. And it might be interesting to talk about like the privacy implications of that. How do you like grow into these enterprises? Like, how does this software actually, like that's the stuff we're tackling at DXOS is like, how do you make this stuff usable for like teams, not just for building code, but for like sharing the data on the back end and like pulling your internal data. Like most of these AI tools, they ask you to give them your Google contacts and like your calendar access and all this stuff. And so it's like, hey, what are y'all doing with all that?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just a weird time, like everything's just up for grabs right now.
I'd love to dive into that a little bit more in a minute, but just before we get there, just because we have talked about like how AI does save, or how AI can save you time, I also want to kind of talk about the flip side of that. Is like, when does it create new overhead? And like a good example of this comes from a question from Jeff in the YouTube chat here. Do you ever run into issues with LLMs losing context over the course of a thread and suggesting new stuff that's way off track? And then how might you keep them focused? Right? Like I know like this is a common thread, especially when you start getting into like much bigger asks where they might like, they might like lose the point. But it does, like I said, it does lead into like this interesting thought of like, potentially could it create new overhead or
I mean, and in my experience, what Raymmar said too, it's if you can break the things you're trying to do down into, chunks, it's like little bits of what the big picture thing you're trying to do is. Context doesn't become quite as big an issue. Although now, man, with some of the agent stuff, even in like Windsurf and Cursor, Replit, their context limits have gone so high as far as what they used to be. So you can query your entire code base, right? So you can say like, okay, cool. And it's not necessarily digging all the way down into every file, but it's saying, okay, this is how things are structured. I see you're doing this over here. This is what you're asking me about. I'm going to say, maybe you should look here, feed me some of this code, then I'm gonna kind of take off from there. But I mean, the context limits, even on local LLMs right now, like stuff I'm running on the Mac Mini, you can get 120,000 context tokens on a local model, running on a 64 gig RAM machine. Now they're not as fast, but you can do a lot with that amount of context for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I think is interesting too, is the size of these context windows is just becoming bigger and bigger. So this idea of these projects getting lost or the agent getting, because that's what happens, right? That's why like it can't have the full context. And so the agent will sometimes scurry off. The other thing is like, I noticed a big jump from 3.5 to 3.7 Sonnet, where the agent just started like trying to be way too helpful. And it just goes off and tries to like do things that, you didn't explicitly ask for. And sometimes that's great. For instance, I had it do a feature one time and it added this little badge that was super nice. And I was like, oh, hey, that's a great little addition. Like I didn't think to add this little thing in the nav, and it's like good looking out. Like maybe that's best practice for this type of pattern. But then sometimes it'll like adjust a file. Like for instance, I ran into an issue the other day and it's like, oh, look, I keep running into this error. I just removed this function and it's like deleted a third of the app or something. It's like, what do you mean you just deleted the thing? Like he's like, oh, I don't know how to fix this, so I'm just going to remove it. It's like, no, that's not an acceptable answer. Like,
Are you sure you needed that? Are you sure?
yeah.
Yeah.
And the
After
worst is
thinking about it.
the worst is when you see like the way Replit works. It like creates these checkpoints and it's showing you the chain of thought, and I think Cursor does a lot of that too. And you'll see it like blow right past success on your feature and start doing more stuff, and you're just like, no, stop. But it didn't create like a checkpoint or a good breakpoint, and you're just like, no, don't do more. Like, you're good. No, that's it. Stop. And so I think that's just the patience part of it. Like my patience has been tested so much working with these things. Like I'm honestly like becoming a whole new like Zen master. And
That's awesome.
please don't check my fucking prompts, okay? Like nobody read my like I'm like, you son of a bitch. Why would you do that?
What would the model say about you being a Zen master?
Oh my god. Yeah.
That's actually how we're gonna end the call. You're gonna share your screen and we're gonna ask your model of choice live on the air, like no, I'm just kidding.
Yep. Well, what's interesting to me is that there's gonna be a whole marketplace that evolves around the personalities of these things. Like we saw like last week with the whole glazing, or the last couple weeks, this whole glazing thing, ChatGPT or the 4.0, just being super passive aggressive and overly confirmational, and like just I think they're calling it glazing, and this idea of like the AI trying to engage you. The same stuff they did with like the social media platforms, where it's like, how long can we keep the user on this platform? And like, that's where the light came from. And that turned into like one of the most predatory advertising models we ever saw on the internet. And now what we're seeing is these AI models are also experimenting with the same thing. Like instead of trying to give you the best answer, they're like, how do we get you more engaged on this platform? And so these personalities are evolving, and you have these whole like AI friends and girlfriends and this whole market building of people that are just interacting with these things. That's going to be like the wild card and it changes how you work with it. Like, I don't know, Will, if you've experienced this, but like when you're working with it and the personality changes and the output also changes, and you're like used to talking to it a certain way and getting a certain type of output, and then they push one of these changes, and now you have to change how you talk to it because it has a little bit different behavior pattern, or it has a little nuance in how it like interprets your messages, and that affects then its output. And so, and sometimes that's a significant change because the whole model changes. And now the agent's doing totally different things. And so it's like almost like, hey, I was used to working with this developer. Like we talked before about having this developer or this team. It's like your team changed overnight. And so like now you have to learn all these different personalities or all these different ways to like talk to this new model or this new thing that showed up. And so that's going to be a very interesting thing where I think folks are going to want like to not have that happen, right? If I'm having a good experience with this agent and building stuff, just like I wouldn't update to a new version of WordPress because it might break all my plugins, I probably might not want to upgrade to this new model because I don't know what the personality is like. I might want to test that in a new way before I like let it have access to this thing, because I'm working nice with this team already over here. My AI team is like in good shape. Don't mess with that while I'm building this project. So that to me is going to be like a very interesting side piece of this whole AI thing that I don't think a lot of people are exploring or talking about, but will be a massive, like there'll be a whole marketplace, just like we have apps where you can go buy personalities. Celebrities will sell their personalities. Like, again, girlfriends, relationships, fake worlds, parties, vibes. You want it to talk to you angry. You want it to talk to you nice. You want it to like, this is a whole world of these personalities are going to basically be like interjected between you and the models.
I'm a huge believer in the system prompt because of that. Like I specifically set the tone of the model to be like, I say I always want full code. I don't want get diffs. Just give it to me straight. And it does a good job. I noticed the glazing, but like not as much as I think a lot of people did, because it does respect the system prompt if you put that in there. So
yeah, and I think tools will probably get better at those system prompts. That's again one of the things like we're thinking about is how do we, obviously you want to have some kind of system prompt, and there's like the stuff we want to have influence the results because we're giving it context about your work and the things that you're doing and whatever inside this space. But we also want to give the user, like the ability to model the prompt also. And so like I think that's fairly standard. You have a system prompt and then the user prompt, and that user prompt, sometimes some companies give you more control over that than others. Like that's going to be another thing too, where folks are going to expect to want to have control over that system prompt or that user prompt, but also have fine-grained nuance control about that context window. Sure, when you're working with a project, that's great, but you see OpenAI experimenting with memory. And so how do you give it long-term running memory of what you're doing without letting it see your notes or your Notion or your Evernote or whatever documents you want to bring into this thing? And so like that's going to become an interesting model too, where it's like not just the code we're bringing in for context, but like your lived experience online is also going to start being sucked into this thing as a context window as you give this agent more instruction. Like we're seeing that with these meeting assistants where they're like taking notes with us in the meeting, and then maybe that turns into tasks that doesn't go out to people that were on the call. It's going to agents that we've been training over the last 3 months to be that team, and they're going to start doing some of this work and keeping us posted. And so like it's not just about opening the context window in the code now. The next layer is like, how do you open the context window to actually learn from you as you have conversations, to be on this call? Like I have a granola running on this right now in the background just so I can have a transcript and think about like, hey, what did we say, and extract whatever insights. Maybe somebody referenced something and I want to say, hey, what was that so-and-so that somebody mentioned, and be able to like pull that out. And so those types of tools adding into this is really going to take that next layer. And this is why I think it's going to take a lot longer than people think, to reach the AGI and like for this to be fully implemented at scale, because it's just going to take time for all those systems to like roll out and be trusted, and people to adopt them, et cetera. So.
Well, I even think like coming up with a way to work with it at scale is still something that a lot of people are really getting used to, right? Because like you're even talking about, the companies that, own these platforms are making rapid iterations and they're making changes, and it can be week to week, month to month, whatever it is. And then you have to adapt to how you're working with it. But like, a lot of times in traditional software, that's the reason why things will be very versioned, right? It's because, you want to lock into something that works when you're deploying it on scale. And I think that a lot of people, especially people building like these MVPs of products with AI, are getting maybe a little bit stuck at that point about like, how do I move forward at scale effectively, and like, how am I able to like lock in that product?
Yep.
And so like, I know like Witt, like I know you're using, there's some AI that's going on behind the scenes in some of the larger projects that you're working on. I would just love to kind of hear like if you're using any kind of methods or protocols there to kind of keep a consistent output for like larger projects, like even something like Algolia, where it's it's using natural language protocol and is trying to translate that into a workable context. Like, is there something that you're using where you're able to like really lock in a workflow that's tested and like delivering results?
Yeah, one of the cool things with a lot of the models is the ability to use function calling and to use tools. We're seeing that like Webflow just released the MCP server where you can actually interact with the Webflow API via Claude. It's pretty cool. I saw somebody had already done something where they're doing the same thing with the designer via an app, where it could actually use methods that weren't exposed in the Webflow MCP server to populate content into the designer, which is like, man, that's amazing. My experience with it as far as like getting good output at scale is really just, keep it as simple as you can. Like just get it as simple as you can while still being able to accomplish the task. Because then if they're doing breaking changes, things that could be potentially breaking changes, you're not nearly as impacted, right? Because you're using a very broad or very simple kind of approach that is going to kind of just hold up no matter what. Because like if you go from a chat model to a thinking model, those are two different kind of approaches. So you need to kind of format the data differently. But with function calling, like we're using it for the Algolia integration we're doing. You can provide a JSON schema of exactly how you want the data to come back from GPT via their API. And so it's like you're always going to get the same structured set of stuff, no matter how you're asking it, no matter what it processes it into. It's always going to have the same structure. So it's much less likely to break when you're processing it on the front end for the user. We also do some stuff with the Webflow API. Like we've got it set up for a webhook. So like when a webhook hits from Webflow for publish, we do an ingestion of all the data via the Webflow API into Cloudflare, which Webflow Cloud is going to be interesting to kind of see how that works into
Huge,
it.
huge for this.
Yeah, that's like I think it's built on Cloudflare workers, but so we'll pull that data out and then we hold that in a KV store on Cloudflare. KV store is basically like a simple NoSQL database, but then we feed that data in with the prompt. So like if we're saying, hey, this user's asking about a company, then when the prompt comes in, we can actually send data up with the prompt that they've entered to say, hey, it's going to be one of these 500 companies that they're asking about. So just use that as your reference. And so you can kind of steer it like that. Anyone that's ever working in any of the APIs or any kind of, like if anybody uses LM Studio or Olama for local stuff, you can also set the temperature, and the lower the temperature for a model, the more consistent the output's going to be. Like you wouldn't want to do creative writing with a really low temperature, but if you want really, like if you're just saying, hey, analyze this, give me an answer, in a very narrow window, set it as low as you can go, and you're going to get the same, generally the same or roughly the same every time. Most of it though it's honestly like so much of it is trial and error and just seeing what works and then saying, okay, cool, this seems tight, seems solid.
Would you consider that method of like saving the values in like the KV pairs? Is that like after we talked the other day and I started getting this idea of like kind of bill shock, and I was like looking this up a little bit more too, especially with like APIs, right? Because like a lot of people are interacting with APIs for the first time, working these into their IDs and into their projects, right? So I did come across the idea of like prompt caching.
Yep.
And I found like a really interesting article where someone was saying like very similar, like they had a large, database of prompts that they worked through themselves once, and then they used the most simple AI they could to like analyze the input and see if it matched any of the prompts that they had cached.
Yep.
So that way they were like utilizing like a very cheap model as opposed to like one of the more expensive ones while still returning that like expensive result. But yeah, so is that like a method of like prompt caching? Like, is that for time savings, cost savings, like kind of both, like
all
just performance?
Yeah, all of it. And so the prompt, OpenAI does prompt caching through the API. So if you have your input structured in a certain way, it's going to say, hey, we recognize this. We don't need to completely reprocess it. Usually cuts the cost by about half in that. Prompt caching and model switching is really interesting. Like that, it's a great example just to flip it to a cheap model, check it, and then push it up. Because you can do that model chaining in the API where you're saying, at the most basic level, I just want to use 4.0 mini even to like analyze what the intent of this is, get a response from that, which usually comes pretty quick, right? And then you can flip that to 0.3, which I honestly would not suggest doing because that's about $40 per million output tokens. But you can do that. You can kind of route it based on what another model says. And there's a concept in models that it's starting to make its way down to local LLMs too. But this mixture of experts, the idea of a mixture of experts, and that's where you have a series of basically smaller models within a big model, and you have a router. And the router is really all it's doing is saying, this is a science question, send it to this model. This is a coding question, send it to this model. This is a question about history. We got a model for that too. And it just is, it kind of sits in the middle and sends it where it needs to go. You can build that stuff yourself. And the reality is, even if you're not super technical, now you can build this stuff yourself. Like, even at that level.
Well, and it's all converging, right? Like the cursors and replets of the worlds are kind of approaching this stuff from the back end where they're mostly focused on the logic and the database and the infrastructure and getting like the working pieces of the app. And they use things like ShadCN and Tailwind to kind of handle the front end. And then what you just saw with Figma's recent launch and some of the stuff that I'm sure Webflow is tinkering with, or Frame, or some of these other tools, is like fine-grained control of the front end, right? And so at some point you have these two worlds, right? And this is the same way it's always been with software development. You have the back end and the front end. And the hardest part of software development is getting those two layers to talk to themselves. Talk to anybody who's ever built software. Like, building the logic and then making it beautiful are like two totally different things. And those worlds are going to converge over the next handful of years, right? Like, the perfect IDE is something like Replit or Cursor that gives you this beautiful back end, but then when you're ready, pops you into something like what we saw with Figma or Webflow that lets you, maybe either from the beginning or at any point in the process, get into the layers and the nuance and adjust those things manually like we're used to in this no-code world, and have those two processes work seamlessly in a single experience. And again, that's why I go back to, like, we're so far away from this actually being like, you know, and maybe not, maybe somebody's going to come out with this tool in 6 months and, you know, like, make me eat my words here, but I doubt it. You know, like, it's like, this stuff is really hard. And to get to that place, you know, like, and so in the meantime, that's all value add for you. Like, if you're somebody selling these services or using them at work or trying to figure out how to like take advantage of them, like, this is just first mover advantage right now. You know, all of these tools are basically opening up a wide open door to say, hey, every system that exists on the internet, like, we have a thesis internally, and lots of other people are, you know, are making this thesis that, like, the cost of creating software is going to essentially zero, you know? And so, like, if you can spin up a piece of software in a weekend that does, you know, XYZ, why would you pay for the tool? And why would you pay for these bloated tools if all you need is one or two pieces of that functionality that you can extract? And then maybe that becomes a thing that you start tinkering on that grows into something else, you know? So, like, I think we're in an era where, like, everything that exists on the internet is about to be challenged. Every rule you think about how business works or how we interact is about to be challenged. So, like, if you're out there thinking about, like, what do I do with this? Just go start building stuff, go start tinkering, go start playing with the tools with, like, a specific outcome. You know, don't just start poking at these things, but, like, think about it. Like, we started the conversation, ask it some wild thing and be like, hey, can you do this? And see if it does. And if it doesn't, think about how you can reframe it. But, like, there's so much opportunity right now, I think, in inside of these toolings that it might take a year or two to play out. But yeah, I don't know. I'd be so excited if I was getting started in my career right now.
Yeah, same, man. Absolutely.
Now, do you guys think that this is like, I my biggest fear with a lot of people who are like learning development right now is we're kind of like skipping the junior developer step, where it's like, okay, you know, a lot of what we're doing is basically like iterating over top of a base idea and getting it to a point where, you know, we can then take it further ourselves, or we can, you know, pay someone to validate this idea further, right? So we're really like jumping past that junior development step. And I feel like a lot of people who are using it might be skipping over the part where they actually have to learn what's happened so that they can validate it to the next step themselves. Like, they can continue to grow. Because, like, as you guys both said, right, like, you both agree, it is just going to get better and better, right? So is there like a way that either of you are using AI to really like learn from the output? I mean,
Just building.
is that just building and experimenting? Yeah.
Yeah, because again, going back to the analogy of like being super interested, if you're building something that you're interested in, like, seeing, and it doesn't work, you're going to go dig in and see why it doesn't work. And maybe that means you're going to go look at the code and find out that, you know, things are not how it's supposed to be, and you got to go troubleshoot it in a certain way. And that involves learning about a new language, or maybe you want to bring in integration. Like, sometimes I've asked it to do an integration, but before I just ask it to like do it, I've had to go learn about like the 3 or 4 different ways there are to do this and pick, you know, or suggest which way might come back, which means doing research technically about the JavaScript language or whatever, you know, other thing that I might need to pull into it. And so the best way to learn, I think, is really just getting your hands, you know, they say like the best way to, the best way to teach something is to learn it, right? Like, is to just know it, you know, and then that's it. Explore, tinker, build some stuff, and dig in the weeds.
So then, Witt, then would you think that also there's a value? I mean, like, we're both kind of like self-hosters. We like to, you know, I especially like to really, you know, get my hands in to actually see how stuff runs under the hood. And I know you talked a little bit about running like local LLMs on a Mac Mini and stuff. Do you think that that's an important exercise for somebody who really wants to get into like kind of see how they function and how they run, how you can run it yourself?
I mean, yeah, I think so. Of course, yeah, of course I think so. Yeah. But when we're talking about like the writing aspect of all this stuff, like being able to articulate, to describe, and things like that, I think that if people are coming into this stuff and they can cultivate their curiosity and their clarity, then they're going to have a really good experience with any of this stuff. Because it's you try something, you see if it works. Like Raymmar was saying, you pivot, you flip it, you word it different. The local stuff for me is like, we talked a little bit earlier about privacy. Like, I really think that that's where a lot of this stuff is going to wind up going, and where a lot of people are going to say, hey, I don't want to send all my data to OpenAI or to Anthropic or whatever. And so part of me digging into this stuff is like, it's just fun. I think it's fun. But also, like, I think there's like a real viable path to where local LLMs will actually carve out like a big part of the market with open source stuff. There's always going to be these gargantuan models that are just incredible and like unattainable, and like you're never going to be able to buy H100s, and well, you can't now.
You can't now.
Right, but you're never going to get that same level of hardware in your house. But you can get something that's pretty good, that runs a pretty good model that 6 years ago we would have looked at and been like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen,
Well, and for some of the stuff you're doing, you might not need those crazy powerful models,
Yeah,
so like for a lot of the stuff you're talking about, those local models running slowly in the background are probably going to be perfect,
I have one right now that sends me a forecast for the next 3 days, every day at 8 a.m. I'm using N8N. I'm using Gemma 27B, all local on the Mac Mini. And it sends me a forecast for the next 3 days of the best potential times to go for a run. And it doesn't matter how fast it completes, because it's like, all I want is the output, it's just running in the background. And then I get my thing. And I do have to connect to APIs to get the weather data, but that's it. Everything else gets processed locally. Think about applying that to like tax returns, things, real solid proprietary data that you don't want to get out there. And I don't know. I mean, we'll see, but I really do think that I think open source and I think local is gonna be big. So
Gonna wait for the 2027 crypto crash, and we're all gonna have ant miners in our basements, like just running, a million context tokens a second. Something crazy.
Patrick, to go back to your learning question real quick, something popped in my head recently. The team gave me like we have a telemetry dashboard or database where we gather events from a tool called Segment, which is used for like software analytics inside of applications. And they were like, hey, do something with this. They're like, what's happening in our app? They're like, we've been collecting all these events. We had a dashboard, but it wasn't like pulling in the right data. And they just like dumped this database in my hands. But I'd never like explored a database. I'm not a computer scientist. Like I've never even, like, I didn't even know what Postgres was like up until like that long ago, let alone what an SQL or a SQL query was. And so I took the database and got a read-only set of credentials that I could plug into Replit, and I had a tool I had the AI build me a tool for creating SQL queries visually. Now, I'm sure there are a million tools that do this, and that was totally confirmed by somebody who's like, why the fuck would you do that? Because like, why would you spend time doing something where you go use a tool? Well, it turned out that like a lot of these tools were expensive, and they had like all of these features where I was like overwhelmed. I was like, that's too much. Like I had to like PhD level like knowledge of SQL to like go use them or like even know what I'm doing. Whereas like this AI, I was able to talk it through like what I wanted to do. And it built me this beautiful little UI for like pulling in the database tables and being able to manually sort through them and select which columns I wanted to pull in. And then even visualize those in like dashboards and create these like drag and drop dashboards. And like I built a whole little marketing suite that you can plug in. And now I don't have to give access to my data to anybody. I can plug any database I want into this thing and go start exploring it visually and create mini dashboards for like, how many users did I get last week? Or how many website visits did I have? Or whatever you want to grab. And so I've learned so much again about databases and SQL queries. And like, I built a cool little tool that I don't know, it's probably never going to be commercially viable. Like, and that's not even interesting to me, but it's like, I now have a tool that when I have to do this, I'm punching way above my weight from a technical standpoint, like way above my weight, And like, those are the types of opportunities that I think like, again, even if I never sell that, the value it's added to my tool chest to have that thing on demand. And now it's in my portfolio, push it to GitHub. I write a nice little description. And I look super smart when somebody comes to see my GitHub profile. Like, oh, this guy's a developer now too, So like, there's so many benefits of just tinkering with the stuff and learning and exploring that you just can't even quantify.
Punching
100%.
above your weight is a great way to describe it, man. That's what it really is.
I just feel like there's so much power that it just unlocks for you if you just know what to ask for and then you take the time to understand the response that comes back, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
All right. This has been really awesome. I want to give everybody a couple more minutes just to get an idea if they got any questions. But like a last kind of closing sentence from both of you. What are your AI predictions for the next like year, for the rest of 2025? Like, December 31st, is there going to be something crazy by the end of the year? Is it going to keep incrementally increasing? Like, what do you got? Quick sentence. First thought, best thought. Raymmar, you want to go first?
It's the year of agents. Yeah.
It's the
year of agents. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's the year of agents.
Witt, what do you think?
I'll piggyback on that. I say I agree that it's the year of agents, and I'll go one further and say it's going to be the year of local agents.
Local agents.
Year of local agents. All right.
I'd be remiss on that note to not also mention that, again, the stuff we're doing at DXOS is all about localized, privacy-focused AI context windows, and not for building code for your Notion workflows, for, like for those types of document-driven workflows. It's like a Notion replacement. But the idea is that you give it this like localized context window. You can collaborate in real time without like sharing data across servers and stuff. And so like those are real concerns that like that's where I think it's interesting. Like in the next couple of years, you're going to see those types of solutions point of like to just replace these big SaaS models that like do these AI like totally native first. Like Notion going back and adding the ability for chat with your notes. Okay, that's cool. And like they might do some cool AI stuff, but like they're never going to re-engineer their whole system to like be native to like AI tools, and like it's going to be very difficult. But a new generation of tools, to Witt's point, localized, private, etc., are being born right now that are very interesting. That I think, are a requirement if we're going to like have a stable, free society online. And that's a whole other conversation.
I'm really excited to check out DXOS, man. I'm like, I love the way you just described that. That makes a lot of sense, and it tracks with a lot of, it like you can run these things on a Raspberry Pi now. Now you're not going to run like the best model, but like that's incredible, right?
Yep.
Like, you can have processing on a 8 gig chip.
Yeah. Well, look at you can run Apple Intelligence on the new phones. You get like literally AI in your pocket if you really. I mean, like they run it back off their cloud, but in a supposedly private way. I don't know. That's a whole other conversation that we can go into too.
Yeah. Well, another interesting concept, if you think about like current software, everything's very structured. The schema is very locked in. Like everything has to be designed and architected. And that's why it's difficult to change like large software at scales, because like that schema's fixed, Okay. And so like that becomes very difficult the larger you get. And most of these enterprise applications are just like 30 of the same types of table tasks and projects and, reports and meetings and whatever. Right. And the next phase, you're probably going to start seeing more like self-organizing databases, right? Like that to me is going to be the next big shift in AI, is that like you won't have to do so much of structuring all the schema. These agentic brains will start pulling in from all these different external sources, your Google, your Gmail, your calendar, your whatever, and it will self-organize your CRM for you and self-organize your meetings and tasks and things that you need to be paying attention to. And the technology that's evolving around that is also very interesting. And that's, again, how do you protect privacy? Who do you want to give access to that? How do you control the context windows that you give? Like just like you might not give an employee full access to the admin of your website, you might not want to give AI full access to your email. You might just want, hey, emails from this extension come through. So if I'm authorizing Google, I don't want to give every one of my emails. I might want to just give it, limited context to what I'm bringing in. And so again, all sorts of tools are being built around this that I think are super interesting. And if anybody's interested, reach out.
All right,
shameless plug at the end there.
Raymmar will definitely be back to give us a DXOS demo in a no code showcase at some point.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Actually, I'd love to do that. We're looking for a handful of folks that want to test and tinker right now, so I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
I think Witt's raised his hand.
Yeah. Witt's
I forgot I didn't turn that off.
Do I have it? I think I turned my reactions off.
Yeah.
It's the most obnoxious thing that just pops onto your screen every time. Like,
right. What is it?
Every time a meeting's detected, it's like not even. Yeah, just the UI on the screen is annoying. The little green blob that's like.
Yeah, I trigger mine manually on purpose. I'm like,
Mine always have mic.
I'll be in the background of meetings and I'll be like, I won't be relevant to the conversation at all. And you'll see my little picture right in the corner and they'll just be like confetti or balloons or something, like fireworks. And then people just, they always pause for a second, like mid-sentence. I'm like, what the hell is that guy doing? All right. I don't think I saw any more questions come in from YouTube, but guys, this has been like really, really an amazing conversation here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, it's been fun to chat.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much, Raymmar and Witt, and to Patrick for leading the conversation. And thanks to everybody who joined us in the lodge, and who listened in on YouTube, watched on YouTube, and shared this with your friends for sure, because I think everybody would like to know more about, the thoughts that came up here. So No Code North will be hosting our Lodge Hangout next Friday, right back here. And our Lodge Hangouts are open to everybody. So they're just kind of a free-form conversation, not usually any particular topic. And we do those usually once every month or two. 2 weeks from now will be our Northern Showcase. And we're going to be having a conversation with Mark Ralph, who's a designer from Toronto who does very, very cool things and a longtime Webflow user. And on May 30th, Tony Seats is going to come and talk to us about something. We don't quite know yet what, but we know it'll be good. So join us and follow us on YouTube and Blue Sky and all the places, and go to nocodenorth.com and sign up for our mailing list so that you get this fabulous email I just read from. And anyway, have a great week. Take care. Bye.
Thanks.